מכירה, Chapter 16. The following laws apply when a person sells seeds of garden vegetables to a colleague when the seeds themselves are not eaten. If the seeds do not grow, the seller is responsible to reimburse him for the money that he took from him, for we can assume that he purchased the seeds to sow them. The above applies provided that the seeds did not grow because of a problem with the seeds themselves. If, however, the reason they did not grow was that the land was smitten with hail or the like, the seller is not responsible for the loss, for perhaps the reason that the seeds did not grow is the hail. Similar laws principles apply in all analogous situations too. If by contrast the seller sold seeds that are eaten, e.g. wheat, barley, and the purchaser sowed them and they did not grow, the seller is not responsible to reimburse the purchaser. Even if he sold them flax seeds, which most people purchase to sow, the seller is not responsible if they are destroyed when they are sown, since there are some who eat these seeds. If, however, the purchaser notifies the seller that he is purchasing the seeds with the intent of sowing them, the seller is responsible for them. The same applies to objects that are purchased for medicinal purposes or for dyes. Similar principles apply in all analogous situations. 3. From the above we can derive the following law. Whenever a person purchases an item from a colleague and informs that he intends to transport it to another city to sell it there, and after he transports it, there is a blemish which nullifies the sale was discovered, the seller may not tell the purchaser, "Bring my article here." Instead, the seller must reimburse the purchaser, and the seller must take trouble of returning the article to his original place for selling it in the place to which it was transported. Even if the article was lost or stolen after the purchaser notified the seller, it is considered to have been in the seller's domain. Different laws apply, however, when the purchaser did not tell the seller that he was planning to transport the article to another country to transported it nevertheless. If he then discovered a blemish, the article is considered to be in the domain of the purchaser until he returns it with its blemish to the seller. 4. When a person purchases produce and discovers a blemish, and afterwards the article is lost or stolen, the article is considered to be in the domain of the purchaser until it returns to the seller. If the produce becomes wormy and is spoiled because of the length of time it had been kept, it is considered to be in the domain of the seller. If the purchaser realized the difficulty and should have notified the seller but failed to do so, the produce is considered to be in his domain. 5. When a person sells an ox to a colleague and is discovered to have tendencies to gore, the seller can excuse himself from responsibility by saying, "I sold it to you for the purpose of slaughter." When does the above apply? And when the purchaser buys an oxen for both slaughter and plowing. If, however, the seller knows the purchaser purchases oxen only to plow, the transaction is considered to have been conducted under false premises, and it is nullified. The same principles apply in all analogous situations. 6. The following law applies when a person sells an animal to a colleague for slaughter. The purchaser slaughters it and is discovered to be treif. If it can definitely be determined that it had been treif when it was purchased, the purchaser should return the slaughtered animal. The seller must return the money. From this ruling, we can derive the following principles that apply when a seller sells an entity that possesses a blemish, and the purchaser makes another blemish before he discovers the first blemish. If the purchaser creates a blemish in the process of performing an act that would ordinarily be performed, if one slaughters an animal that is treif, he is not liable. If, however, he deviates from ordinary practice and makes another blemish before he discovers the first blemish, he should return the article to his owner and reimburse him for the blemish that he made. 7. The following rules apply when a person purchases a garment and cuts it with the intent of making a cloak from it. If because of the cut that he made he discovers a blemish in the fabric, he may return the pieces, since should he stole the cloak and then discover the blemish in the fabric, he may return it. If it is increased in value, he may collect from the seller the value of the increase his sewing generated. Similar principles apply in non-analogous situations. 8. The following principles apply when a person sells landed property to a colleague. The purchaser derives benefit from the property and afterwards discovers a blemish in it. If he desires to return the land to its owners, he must reimburse them for all the benefit he derived. If it was a courtyard and he dwelt in it, he must pay them rent. 9. When a person sells an article with a blemish that he has not recognized, and the article that is sold becomes destroyed because of that blemish, the seller must return the money that he received. 10. What is implied? If a person sold an ox that did not have molars, the purchaser purchased that ox together with his cattle, placed food before all of them, and then he didn't realize that the ox he had purchased was not eating until it died of starvation. In such an instance, the purchaser may return the corpse to the seller, who is required to return his money to him. Similar principles apply in all analogous situations. 11. Different rules apply if the seller is a broker who purchases from one person and sells to another without keeping the animal in his possession. For this reason, we assume as the broker did not know of the blemish. Therefore, the broker was required to take a rabbinic oath that he did not know of the blemish, and then he resolved the responsibility of the rationales. And the purchaser had the responsibility of checking the ox he purchased independently, returning it to the broker before it died. The broker would then to the one who sold it, and since the purchaser did not do this, he caused himself a loss. Similar principles apply in analogous situation. 12. The following was applied when a person slaughters his firstborn animal, sells this meat, and then purchaser discovers that the seller had not shown it to an expert. When what the purchaser ate is not taken into consideration, the seller is required to return to the purchaser the money he paid. The seller should receive the remainder of the meat from the purchaser and return his money to him. Similarly, if a butcher slaughters a cow and sells it and discovers that it was treif, what the purchaser ate is not taken into consideration, the seller is required to return the purchaser's money to him. The meat that was not eaten should be returned to the butcher, and he should return the money to the purchaser. 13. If the purchaser sold the meat that was treif to Gentiles, he should come to an understanding with the butcher regarding the money for the treif. The butcher should then return the remainder to him. Similar principles apply in analogous situations. 14. When a person sells meat to a colleague and it is discovered to be the meat of a firstborn animal, and he sells produce and it is discovered to be tevel or wine and is discovered to be used for idolatry, when the purchaser consumed it, what the purchaser consumed is not taken into consideration, the seller is required to return the money he paid to the purchaser. The same law applies to any substance which is forbidden to partake according to scriptural law. This applies both when the prohibition is punishable by curse or when there is merely an ordinary prohibition involved. Different laws apply if one sells an object that is forbidden by rabbinic law to be eaten. The produce exists. One should return the produce and receive in return the money originally paid. If whoever one ate them the one has benefited from them, and the seller is not obligated to return anything to the purchaser whenever it is forbidden to benefit from an object, whether by scriptural or rabbinical law. The seller must return the money he received. There is no binding legal convention governing such a sale. מכירה, chapter 17:1. There are 4 states applicable with regard to a seller. A, the seller sold wheat, assuring the purchaser that it was of high quality and was discovered to be of low quality. In such an instance, the purchaser may retract, but not the seller. B, the purchaser convinced the seller that the wheat was of low quality and was discovered to be of high quality. In such an instance, the seller may retract, but not the purchaser. C, the purchaser was said to be of low quality, was discovered to be of low quality, but not of absolutely lowest quality. Or D, he assured him that it was of high quality and it was discovered to be of high quality, but not of the absolutely highest quality. C, if there was an unfair gain of 1/6 of its value. If there was, neither may retract, but the unfair gain must be returned too. If, however, a person claims to be selling red wheat and in fact it is white wheat and in fact it is red, olive wood and in fact it is from a wild fig tree, a wild fig tree is in fact from an olive tree, wine was discovered to be vinegar, vinegar was discovered to be wine, both the seller and the purchaser can retract. For the object of the sale is not of the type the seller stated he was selling. Similar principles apply in analogous situations. 3, when a person sells wine to a colleague and the purchaser transfers it to his own containers, even if it turns into vinegar immediately, the seller is not held responsible for it. The law applies even if the purchaser says, I am purchasing it to use for cooking. If the seller knew that the wine was turning sour, the transaction is considered to have been taken under false pretenses. Different laws apply. If the person sold the colleague wine and it remained in the seller's containers and turned into vinegar. If the purchaser told the seller, I need this for cooking, and the wine turned sour, the purchaser may return it and say, here is your wine and your containers. I did not buy it to drink, but rather to use for cooking, a little bit at a time. If the purchaser did not say, I need this for cooking, he may not return it. For the owner may tell him, why didn't you drink it immediately? You should not have left it until it turned sour. 4, the following was applied when a person sells a barrel of beer to a colleague and a barrel belonging to the seller. If the beer becomes like vinegar within the first 3 days after the sale, this change is considered to have taken place in the seller's domain, and he must return the money he received. From that point onward, the change is considered to have taken place in the purchaser's domain. 5, the following was applied when a person sells a barrel of wine to a colleague who tends to sell little by little, or half. If half of or a third of the wine becomes sour, it may be returned to the seller. If, however, the purchaser changes the whole for the spout, or the market day came and he was lax and did not try to sell the wine, it's considered to have been in the purchaser's domain. It's considered to be in the purchaser's domain. Similar laws apply when a person accepts a barrel of wine from a colleague with the intent of transporting it to a particular destination, selling it there. If the price of the wine decreases or it becomes sour before it reaches the destination, it's considered to be in the purchaser's domain, for the barrel and the wine are his. Similar principles apply in analogous situations. 6, when a person tells a colleague, I am selling you fragrant wine, he is responsible for the wine to retain its fragrance till the holiday issue was. If he tells him, I'm selling you aged wine, he must give him wine for the previous year. If he mentions vintage wine, it must be in its 3rd year and must retain its flavor without turning sour until the holiday of Sukkot. In a locale where there was a well-known custom, everything is determined by the local custom. 7, when a person tells a colleague, I am selling you the seller of wine for cooking, or merely a seller of wine, the purchaser accepts the fact the wine from 10 containers out of 100 will not be of as high a quality and will already have begun to sour. If more wine changes flavor, he has not acquiesced. 8, if the seller told the purchaser, I am selling you a seller of wine for cooking, and he told him, I am selling you a barrel of wine, and provide him with wine that is entirely of high quality and fit to be used for cooking. If he told him, I'm selling you this seller of wine, you should provide him with wine similar to that in the store, i.e. of average quality, neither bad nor good. If he told him, I'm selling you the seller, and did not mention that it contained wine, the purchaser must accept it even if it was all vinegar. Similar principles apply in analogous situation. 9, when a person tells a colleague, I'm selling you a wooden kneading tray, or I'm selling you a beam for an olive press, he may not give him a piece of wood that is fit to have a kneading tray hewn out of it, or a beam that is fit to have been made into a beam from an olive press. Instead, he must give him a kneading tray that has already been fashioned, or a beam for an olive press that has already been fashioned, one that any person seeing it will say, this is a kneading tray, or this is a beam for an olive press. Similar principles apply in all analogous situations. מכירה, chapter 18:1, is forbidden to deceive people with regard to business deal or to beguile them. This prohibition applies equally to Jews and to Gentiles. If someone knows that the article he is selling is a blemish, he must notify the purchaser about it, even if it is even forbidden to beguile a person with false flattery. One may not improve the appearance of a man being sold as a servant, nor an animal, nor of old utensils by making them appear to be new. One may, however, improve the appearance of new utensils by polishing them, ironing them, and beautifying them as much as necessary. 3, one may not feed a man water in which bran was cooked, which causes his body to swell, making his face appear larger. One may not paint one's face with rogue and like. One may not inflate intestines that are being sold in a butchery. One may not soak meat in water. All practices similar to the above are also forbidden. One may not sell Gentile meat from an animal that is not ritually slaughtered on the pretense that it was ritually slaughtered, although religiously there is no difference to him whether or not the ritual slaughter was performed. 4, it is permitted to remove the husks from kernels of grain or beans, provided one does not do so only on the top of the grain sack, for doing so creates a false impression that the entire quantity has been husked. It is permitted for a merchant to distribute rusted seeds or nuts to children and maidservants that it will frequent his establishment. A merchant may discount the ordinary market price of an item to increase its volume to customers. The other merchants in the marketplace may not prevent it from doing so, nor is this considered to be deceiving a customer. 5, one may not mix 2 batches of the same species of produce together. So possible when both batches are freshly harvested. Certainly, it's forbidden to mix produce harvested previously with freshly harvested produce. This applies even when previously harvested produce is more expensive than the freshly harvested, because the purchaser may desire to store the produce for an extended time. The exception is with regard to wine. It's permitted to mix stronger wine with lighter wine during time that the wine is fermenting alone, because one improves the flavor of the other. If the flavor of the wine added is distinct, it is permitted to mix them at any time, for whenever an entity is distinct, its presence can be detected by a purchaser, and therefore mixing it in is permitted. 6. Water may not be mixed together with wine that one tends to sell. When water is mixed with a person's wine, you should not sell it in the store unless he notifies the customers. You should not sell them to a merchant, even if he notifies them, lest the merchant deceive others. In a place where it is customary to add water to wine, one may do so provided one does so at the time the wine is fermenting. 7. A merchant may take from 5 wine vats and store the mixture in one tank. He may take from 5 granaries and store the mixture in one warehouse, as long as he does not intend to mix the produce. 8. It is forbidden to mix dregs with other wine or oil. Mixing even the slightest amount is forbidden. One may not mix even the dregs produced yesterday with the dregs produced today. If whoever one pours wine from one container to another, one may add the dregs to the wine. 9. When a person sells refined oil to a colleague, the purchaser refuses to accept any dregs at all. If he sells them oil without mentioning any descriptive term, the purchaser is willing to accept that 1.5 lug from every 100 lug will be dregs. If he accepts the fact that the remainder of the oil will have dregs, thus it will be murky, with dregs being suspended in the oil in addition to the quantity of dregs that is standard in that locale. 10. When does he apply? When he pays the money in Tishrei, when the oil is cloudy, and receives the oil in Nisan according to the measure of Tishrei, which is larger because the unrefined oil above. However, the purchaser takes the measure given in Nisan, which is smaller, the oil has already become clear, he accepts only the measure of dregs mentioned in the previous law. 11. When a person sells wheat to a colleague, the purchaser accepts that he will receive 1/4 of a kav of legumes for every saw. When he purchases barley, accepts that he will receive 1/4 of a kav of dried out kernels for every saw. When he purchases lentils, he accepts that he will receive 1/4 of a kav of pebbles for every saw. When he purchases figs, he accepts that he will receive 10 wormy ones for every 100. If a person sells any other type of produce to a colleague, the purchaser accepts that he will receive 1/4 of a kav of dirty produce for every saw. If the amount of lower quality produce exceeds these measures, the seller must sift the entire batch and give the purchaser sifted and clean produce that has no undesirable qualities. 12. All the above applies only in a place where there is no established custom. In a place where there is an established custom, everything follows the established custom. 13. There are places where it is customary for all produce to be sold when it has been cleaned and sifted, removing all foreign bodies, and for the wine and the oils to be clear without selling any dregs at all. And there are other places where produce is sold even when there are half dregs, or there is the half amount of sand, straw, or other substance in the produce. Therefore, in such a locale, if a person takes a stone from a colleague's grain heap, he must reimburse the owner as if the stone he took were wheat. 4. If he had left there, it would have been sold as part of the measure of wheat. If one would say, let him return the stone, this is forbidden, it is forbidden to mix even the slightest amount of foreign substances into produce. 14. When a person sells barrels in the Sharon, in a place where there is no established custom, the purchaser accepts that out of 100 barrels, he will receive 10 that are of inferior quality. Even these must, however, be attractive and fixed with pitch.